My name is Mike Harvey. I think this is my fourth time speaking at a Blockly Summit, but just my first time doing it as a member of the Blockly team. Today, we're going to be talking about making your accessible blocks, making your custom blocks accessible, specifically focused around the ARIA labels that Ben was talking about. There's a lot of other work that's happening internally that you kind of don't have to worry about. So I want to show you the things that as you're working, as you're waiting for that V13 release to come through, what are the APIs that you want to know about so that you can make sure that, interesting field values that you have are being represented correctly and that sort of thing. So we'll talk about what to do if you have custom field classes. You can raise your hand if you might have some of those in your repo. Yeah, if you've extended Blockly fields, you might want to take a look at those. I'm going to show you why and where. If you've made custom blocks, I can't imagine there are a whole lot of applications that don't have any custom blocks. There's going to be some auditing involved to make sure that your fields and your inputs are working the way that you'd expect, but we've tried to make that as easy as possible. We'll wrap up with some best practices. Before we jump in, just want to do a little bit of a basic context setting for fields themselves. So what makes a field understandable? So this block here, the yellow highlight is showing a text input field. When we look at this, we need to quickly come to an understanding of what it is, how to use it. This is a text input field, so I guess I can type into it. It's different than a drop-down menu. It's different than a checkbox. It has a value. In this case, the value is already nice and readable, so that's pretty easy. By the way, when I use the word field, I'm talking about that as the technical Blockly term. Field itself, we've found with users, isn't necessarily an understood thing. It's not a thing that is going to be typically said by the screen reader, but we do need to understand that. But so for built-in field support, all of Blockly's core field types already have built-in support. You're going to see that for each standard type of field, we're going to describe the type of field and the value. So whether that's number 23 or text hello world or text empty, drop down true, checkbox checked. If you're using fields like these, you don't really have to worry too much about making them work in your application. It should already happen. You notice in the second example, we've already done a little bit of work to handle some special handling of unusual values. You don't want it just to try to read an empty string. That's not really useful to somebody who actually needs some context. All right, so let's talk about custom field classes. So field labels are comprised of both the field's type and value. You saw that on the last slide. And there are some methods that you might need to override in your custom field classes to make sure that this works. So we have a field type name and we have a field value. Now the composition of the overall field label, that's handled internally. You have to worry about these two specific pieces. And so the methods that I want you to be aware of are get ARIA type name. That's the one that's going to return text or dropdown or image, whatever the type is, and then get ARIA value, which is going to somehow turn the actual field value into something that's readable. Here's an example of how we had to do this just for the number field. So the number field is an extension of the standard input field. And every implementation of this method that we have in core Blockly for V13 basically looks the same way. It's going to return some safe default that describes the type, and that's going to be technically set up as a fallback because there's a property ARIA type name that can be provided if you want for individual blocks, but we'll get to more of that later. If you extend any of our fields and you've done so in a way that recontextualizes how they work, you might want to extend this method in your classes. And then get ARIA value has a similar purpose, but it's for the actual field value. Variable fields are an extension of drop-down fields in core Blockly, and we already have the ability to read what's in the drop-down, but we found in testing that sometimes because variable values, those labels, they might be something human readable like score, or they could just be something like I, and if you just get that read out, it's not very clear what that means. And so the purpose of this implementation here is just to wrap the value in the word variable so that it's clear what the purpose is. So this is a really simple example of just adding a little bit more context for this type of field. Probably you have some blocks that are more complicated, have different types of values. Take a second just to look at each of these field values and imagine what would you expect to be read out loud. What is the actual like true value here, and how do you convert it into something that's going to be understood if it's read out loud? There is some work to do, and I know that some of your applications have some complex fields where you have like sprite pickers and music composition stuff and URLs and all kinds of things. So these are the sorts of things that you should be thinking about, because while we've tried to make sure everything's working out of the box in core, we cannot anticipate all the different ways that you're utilizing fields in your applications. Okay, that's what you do for your custom fields. Even if you've done that, or you're just using our built-in fields, you still might want to look a little bit more closely at your blocks. So let's look at some examples of why or when. Okay, function definitions, or procedures as they're called in the in core. The name for a function is just set in a text input field. And if you remember that first slide, it would just say text, which is accurate but not very informative, right? So what we've done here, just for this block, it's still using a standard text input field, but we're specifying the ARIA type name, function name. And that has the result when here, like in the voiceover, instead of saying text do something, we get function name do something. So it's a little bit more useful. This is just a simple example of how you can do this just by adding it right to the JSON definition. Okay, quick one to think about here. I want you to look at the drop-down values that are shown here and identify any that you think might be problematic for screen readers. Remembering, of course, that screen readers are wildly inconsistent. That punctuation mark, I'm hoping, is what you've zeroed in on. We would hope that that would be read as the word number in this context, but sometimes that might be interpreted as what? Hash or pound, or what is it, octothorpe, I think is one of the names for that symbol. And so we want to make sure that we know with confidence that this is going to be consistent. So if you have drop-down fields, it's worth looking through them and looking for potential issues like that. If you've created blocks with drop-down fields before, you've probably seen the menu generator structure, which is usually a list of 2-item arrays for options where you have the user-facing label and then the actual code value. We've extended the menu items so that they can take a third optional value that is basically just an override for ARIA purposes. And you can see that it's optional. If it's not there, we just fall back on that first label. So if you don't do this, it will still, work to a degree, but you might not get the optimal output that you want. Here's another example. I like this one because there are no words on the block anywhere to be seen, and it's an example of something that you might have to think through. Even if we assumed that screen readers were consistent and they would all call that a caret, that's probably not the right label in the context of a block like this. So imagine what would you want to provide as explicit overrides for each of these options here. And again, you can add them just right to the option arrays like so. A reminder that these new ARIA labels will show up in different contexts. Like when you focus on the field, you'll see that here we've got divided by instead of just, reading division symbol or maybe nothing. Or when you're looking at the overall block label, when you're focusing on a block, those can show up as well there too. So you want to think about like the context of how these things are going to appear. Quick note, I've been using like these hard-coded English strings, but this is meant to work with the translation system. This is probably a little bit harder to read at a glance, so I didn't make my slides this way. This is closer to what you'll see in like Blockly Core if you look at it. And the nice thing, even with the fallback logic that I was mentioning, if your user-facing labels, the visible ones, are translated, then the ARIA labels will also be, as long as you're using that same system. Okay, and then inputs. The other piece of the block that's really important, kind of acts as that bridge layer between fields and everything else that's going on. Input labels are computed automatically in Blockly v13. And the way it's done is based on the nearby fields that are there. Print, or in the case of the statement input, we're looking at else, which comes right before it. You might also see these, so you might see these when you're focusing an input. You might also see them in the context of like move mode announcements here, where it's like we're moving it to the if true input of this block. These examples are all pretty clean and simple. There was no special handling that needed to be done. But I want you to take a look at these inputs and imagine, based on what I just showed you, what would you expect the computed labels to look like for these? First one here, we've got a tan 2 of x, and then we have y. And you can see that those aren't quite what we would intend. And create text with is going to end up being the label for just that first value input. That's not really the purpose of that label on this block. It's just the way that it was designed. So let's talk about how you can override that just for these blocks. We'll go with the trig block first. You'll see that, again, in JSON, you can just add an ARIA label text value like x coordinate. And if that block is focused or if we're using it to describe a movement or something like that, that's what you'll see in the voiceover window, and that's what the user will hear. If your block's more complex or dynamic, like this text join block that has the whole like mutator thing going on, you might have some JavaScript. You can specify label text here. We have a method set ARIA label provider. This accepts text like is shown here. You can also pass this a function too. So if you need to do something that's really dynamic, like maybe you want the label to change based on the value that's set on another field on the block or crazy things like that, that should also be supported as well. You just need to reference that input and call this with whatever the label you want. And now instead of create text with for that one, we get, I don't know, value 1 or something along those lines. Okay, so we talked about how labels for fields and inputs are both going to be really important to the accessibility model in Blockly v13. Let's go over just kind of quickly to wrap up some principles, considerations, best practices. Fields need a meaningful type name. Yes, because users should understand what kind of field they're interacting with. I showed you get ARIA type name is the method that you might want to extend in your field classes, or if you're doing it block by block, you can specify an ARIA type name property. And you're going to notice a theme here on the next couple slides for the green box, because the best practice is really just going to be to make sure you audit your stuff. Go through your blocks and look for things that might need updating. You don't want to see surprising labels. Okay, fields need a meaningful value as well, because users should understand the current content or state of a field. So we have get ARIA value to do that at the class level. I showed you an example of doing this block by block in the drop-down menu generator. Thinking about things like empty values, symbols, abbreviations, structured data, those types of things can require some special handling. So what do? You're going to have to go through your blocks and just make sure that you've kind of got your bases covered. And then inputs. They need context too, because that's going to be important for helping users to understand the role of each input within a block. Reminder that they're computed automatically, so you might not have to do anything. It kind of depends on how your blocks are configured, but they can be overridden at the block level. So what do? Go through your blocks, make sure that all of the inputs seem to have reasonable labels. And that comes to the end of my content. I know this was like pretty technical and kind of like a little bit fire hose of information. I wanted to just kind of give an overview. Feel free to like come and chat through this stuff with me if you're like wondering how to do this stuff, or if you're like close to doing the V13 updates, or you're ready to start that. We'll also, of course, have some great documentation that will cover all these things too in perpetuity at, what is it, docs.blockly.com, Mary Beth? Yeah. So thank you for your time.
This is not a technical question, but I noticed in your examples that you tend to present the block type before the value of the block. And I wondered if that was a conscious decision, because a lot of the literature suggests that you present the distinguishing content first. So if you've got 7 numbers and you say number, blah, number, blah, number, blah, number, blah each time, every time you have to listen to number before you can figure out if you're on the right value. Whereas if you say the number first, you can skip through much faster. So I wondered if that was an explicit decision you've made based on some kind of like intuition or research, or...
Yeah, great question. It wasn't an explicit decision that I made. Ben, do you have more context on that, or Mary Beth?
Yeah. So Yes. So we tried to minimize the repeated information that you keep hearing. So when you are focused on a block, you don't actually hear the type of the field. So the block, if you're focused on a block, you'll hear the values of each of the fields, but not the types. So you are not going to hear the type until you focus on a specific field. So that cuts down on the minimization. But yes, I'm going to say 90% of our approach to labels was validated with users. We tried something, we gave it to users, and sometimes they were like, "Oh, horrible! Like, please stop this. You need to fix this." And other times, it was like, "This is fine," or "I can't think of a better way to do this." And sometimes it was like, "Great." So the approach was generally validated, and we did aim to minimize that repeated nature.